Hi, it's Scott Vogel on sex addiction, and I'm going to talk to you about 6 ways sex addiction can hurt you. There's really no area of a person's life where sex addiction can't cause harm. Healthy sex is an important part of a person's life with many beneficial aspects. It's part of who we are. It's part of how we express ourselves sexually, and that means a great deal. When a person has a healthy sex life, it can lead to an overall sense of happiness. That's the design of sex. Unfortunately, when unhealthy sex comes into our lives, it corrupts and it's opposite of the healthy aspects of who we are and how we express ourselves in happiness. Sex addiction doesn't get better over time on its own. Many people think that addicts would like to believe that. Unfortunately, it's not true. Over time, nothing changes. It would be nice if it did, because recovery is a long, difficult process. But the alternative, staying in the disease, is much worse. So it's important for sex addicts who are thinking about treatment and getting into recovery to know what this disease really can do. So addiction doesn't go away, and it affects people emotionally, socially, physically, legally, financially, and spiritually. When it comes to affecting you emotionally, sex addiction is an endless loop of seeking a sexual high to deal with an emotional low. Following the high comes a great deal of guilt and shame. And the cause of the original problem haven't gone away. So not only is the individual dealing with the guilt and shame, but they're dealing with the original problem that caused them to act out with the highs and the lows and the guilt and the shame. And so they get caught in this cycle because they get the problem which causes them to need a high to counter the low, then they have the guilt and the shame, and then they're caught in this cycle and they become very frustrated because they can't escape these behaviors, and they engage in them more often in secret, and it leads to anxiety and stress, plus the fear of discovery and consequences. So they're escaping into their addiction, and they're constantly repeating the cycle over and over and over again. Now, when it comes to socially, you're talking about being in emotional turmoil causes your life to be unmanageable at times, and it makes it difficult for people to be around somebody that's in this turmoil all the time because they're cranky, they're irritable, they're not happy. So people tend to avoid that person, and the person starts to isolate as a result of people avoiding them and being in this emotional turmoil, living this secret life. And the main goal of the addict, their priorities, become more isolation because they need to participate in their disease of sex addiction. Their relationships are damaged. The connection between their spouses, partners, loved ones, families start to break apart. Friends become distant. Acquaintances get pushed away because the addict's behavior and the ignorance of the problem cause them to isolate much, much more. Number 3 is physically, how sex addiction can hurt you. Now, we're talking about the health of the sex addict starts to deteriorate. They start not taking care of themselves, not exercising, not eating properly, not getting enough sleep. And for sex addicts, it's not about the love or the intimacy. It's about the chemical rush in the brain they get from sex acts, which at times they confuse as deeper emotions because it feels so good. Now, the rush isn't a bad thing, but when it's all there is, an addict can lose their desire for other things in life. A sex addict can lose interest in regular sex altogether, and it might come to a point where a person may only be able to perform sexually during an act that their spouse or partner doesn't enjoy, or they need someone else entirely. When it comes to ignoring a person's safety, many sex addicts will go to great lengths to get what they need. And then we're talking about sexually transmitted diseases, sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy, and then there's the part about putting themselves in danger, in physical harm, by frequenting unsafe areas or putting themselves in dangerous situations. And a lot of love addicts will get themselves into dangerous situations. As far as legal goes, as the addiction progresses, the sex addict needs to resort to more extreme behavior. They need a higher rush. They need a bigger thrill. And that a lot of times will put them on the wrong side of the law because that creates that excitement, that rush, that thrill. So when they need to achieve this high, they involve themselves in more extreme behavior. It could be sexual harassment. We could be talking about voyeurism. There's exhibitionism, prostitution, rape and molestation, and other activities that are against the law. As far as financially goes, spending money on pornography, spending money on prostitutes, bills for phone sex, and then you get into potential job loss from viewing pornography at work, from spending so much time that your ability to do your job deteriorates. There's legal fines, and somebody is arrested and has to come up with fees for attorneys and court costs. And then prison. People end up in prison. There's no income coming in. There's no livelihood while a person's in prison. And a combination of a lot of these expenses can put a person into some serious debt, and it can follow a sex addict their entire lives and ruin their families, ruin what they've worked for. So the financial aspect is quite severe when it comes to sex addiction. And of course, lost opportunities is not a direct cost, but it's an indirect cost. All the time, all the effort, all the energy, all the hours spent in the addiction, what could the addict have been doing? Working on health, working on family, working on projects, hobbies, or building a business or another source of income. Those are lost opportunities and definitely affect the sex addict financially. And number 6 is spiritually. How does this disease affect people spiritually? It's usually unique to each person. Sex addiction can damage this side of a person regardless of their beliefs. Many religions have clear rules on sexuality, and the effects of sex addiction on that can be pretty obvious in breaking the rules of that particular religion. Less obvious is the damage it can cause to a person's sense of self, their individuality, their worth. Many sex addicts and other addicts have a very low sense of self-worth. If they had a high sense of self, they probably wouldn't be hurting themselves the way they do. And they're a slave to their urges at the expense of other things. They're broken in their sex addiction. This damage to the sense of self creates this unworthiness, which when someone feels unworthy and has no sense of self, they want something that will help them feel better, which goes to the addiction. And they have a disconnect from their higher power. They're out of control. they can't make decisions properly on how to live their lives in a healthy way. So this ends up bringing out the worst in a person, and it makes them look back at their lives as lost. They feel lost. All of these harmful effects can influence a person, and it perpetuates the addiction. When they get emotionally crushed from the addiction, when their social lives start to become affected, when their physical being, their health, their nutrition, their diet, their exercise starts to go away in place of the addiction, when they get into legal problems, when it starts to cost more and more money financially, and then all of this combines to make the spiritual side of the person much weaker, where the person has that feeling of worthlessness, and then we start the cycle all over again. Sex addiction does and hurts people. Please visit our YouTube channel on sex addiction for more videos on sex addiction and recovery from sex addiction. Also, please visit our blog at onsexaddiction.com, where you'll find a free video explaining what sex addiction is, the 7 symptoms of sex addiction, the 4 traumas of addiction, and the 4 faulty core beliefs set up by those traumas of addiction. You'll also find the solution in recovery from sex addiction, the 7 paths to success. You'll also find more information about sex addiction and sex addiction recovery. This is Scott Vogel on Sex Addiction.